So this table was just dropped off to me. It's, yeah, pretty much fallen apart completely. And I decided that we would make a completely new table and give it to them for no charge at all. So let's get into it. As you can see here, the frame that is holding this glass piece in is completely falling apart. So now that I've gotten rid of everything that wasn't savable, leaving me with a piece of glass, I had this old slab of maple sitting around, and I figured it'd be perfect to turn into a beautiful table. To start off, I'm going to use my track saw to rip this slab down to a rough length. I'm going to use the short track and just rip it all through in one quick cut. I'm going to take two pieces out of the slab, one for the legs and one for the frame that'll hold the actual glass piece together. Now I'm going to use my jointer and get a nice 90-degree edge that I can use and take it to the table saw. I'm going to use that reference point on the fence and cut off the second live edge that I don't need. I noticed that there is quite the cup in this, so I went ahead and flipped it down so that the cup was facing down to give it a more stable platform on the bed of the table saw, so nothing will move around while I'm cutting. Now that I have the width of the board roughed out, I'm going to take it back to the joiner to get the face flat, so then I can take it to the planer and get two parallel flat sides. This is a really important step, taking that fence off, because the board is actually wider than my jointer. So what I'm going to do is called running a rabbit. I'm going to joint and make a perfectly flat part of this board, as you can see when I flip it over here in a second. So right here you can see that only half the board has been cut and perfectly flat. So I'm going to isolate that reference points when I put it through the planer by using that little board right there. So it will make a perfectly flat parallel reference face off that small section that I made flat. Once it's fully through, I'll pop off that board, flip it over, and now I have two perfectly flat parallel pieces that span the whole width of the board. And then I'm just going to keep running it through till I have no saw marks left to get to that pretty wood. After running through the planer like that, the edges of the board don't end up being perfectly 90 degrees to the face of the board. So I'm going to run one edge back through the jointer to make it perfectly square to the face of the board. That's going to be really important for this next step, where I'm going to run it through the table saw to get two perfectly parallel sides of the board that are perfectly 90 to the face of the board. You can see here I'm ripping that far edge off that I did not joint. So now, using the fence of the table saw, I have the exact same width of the board the entire way through, with two perfectly 90-degree edges to the two parallel faces. So now this board is completely dimensionally there. Now that I have a dimensional board, I'm going to rip all of the pieces for the sides of the frame that'll hold the glass out of this board. If you want your chance to win a $2,000 coffee table completely free, then stay tuned for the end of this video to figure out how. Now that I have those boards cut to the right width for the frame, I'm going to take them to the chop saw and cut them at 45-degree angles at the right length, which I didn't get on video. But after that, I'm going to take them and I'm going to cut a rabbet using my jointer to actually hold the piece of glass itself. So I slid that fence all the way over so that I can hold the perfect space for the piece of glass to sit on all four sides. right there you can see that little groove, which is called a rabbet, that I cut using that jointer. And now I'm just kind of making sure everything fits together before I move on. And it's all looking good, and it's pretty tight in there. So the next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut splines. So I'm going to use this biscuit joiner, and I'm going to plunge it in and slide it across the 45-degree on all 4 pieces on each side of the piece. And this is going to leave a little groove where I can slide in a little rectangle piece of wood. And this is going to be a little accent wood that's just going to make this joint way stronger. Using the scrap piece of wood I had, I'm going to use the drum sander to take it down to the perfect thickness to slide into that slot that I just cut on the sides of the frame. Right here you can see I got a nice tight fit. Now that I have it to the right thickness, I'm going to rip it down using the table saw to the right width so that it fits perfectly in the groove on each side. Once I get to the right width, I'm going to use the chop saw to cut it down to a rough length. I'm going to leave about a 1/2 inch sticking out on each side of the actual frame itself. So later on I'm going to flush cut it using a router bit. Now I'm just going to glue everything together. I'm going to hammer those splines in and then just pop the actual piece of the frame in. And it slides in there pretty well. It's a little tighter than I wanted. That glue kind of made it a lot thicker. And I actually had to use this clamp to kind of slide everything together nice and tight, which is okay. But next time I'm definitely going to cut it a little bit looser. And you can really see that I'm starting to struggle with this glue up. I kind of thought it was going to be a easy glue up, but every time I would slide one piece in and slide another piece out, and this glue up took way longer than I wanted it to. So what I ended up doing was popping that piece of glass in there just to kind of hold everything square, because that was my biggest issue, is I just kept sliding it out of square, and I was really worried that the glass wasn't going to fit in there afterwards. But at the end of the day, I got it. But then I ran into the issue that I actually couldn't get the glass piece out of the frame with all those clamps on it. So I just ended up leaving it in there and set the whole piece to the side and let it dry. I went ahead and cut these templates out of this 1/2 inch plywood for the legs. I thought it had a nice cool shape, and the end of it had a little angle on it, so it would kind of stagger out a little bit instead of just being perfectly straight up and down, which I thought ended up being a really nice cool touch. So I'm going to use this template just to mark out on all these blanks for the legs where I want to cut them on the bandsaw, and I'm just going to cut them roughly to width, get as close to the line as I can without touching the line. And then I'm going to use that template and a flush trim router bit to get it exactly the way it needs to be. And this was actually kind of a tricky process because I put 2 of the templates on each one, so I didn't have much room to kind of mess up with that saw blade on there. But eventually I got it. I in hindsight would have made them a little farther apart, so I would have had a little bit more wiggle room. Once I get all the pieces rough cut out to shape, I'm going to nail the template back on, as you can see right there, and that template is going to ride across the bearing on this router bit. So it's going to cut anything that is sticking out past that template. It's going to cut it perfectly flush with the template, so each one will be the exact same as the last piece. And you can probably hear it there that router bit is pretty dull, which kind of came and bit me in the butt a little bit later on. And you're about to see my little oopsie that I made with this router bit, and pop. Yeah, there was quite the crazy amount of tear out right there. I took like that whole chunk off, so that board's completely useless now. But luckily I had a second board that I used and just roughed it out, so no worries there. But now I'm using a 1/4 inch router bit and to make this nice bevel all the way across all of the legs, and this bevel really tied together the legs well. I wasn't too sure about the shape after getting them flush trimmed, but after seeing them with the round over, they just really popped. It looked a lot better like this. Now, if you look into that clear pipe, you can see the insane amount of sawdust that's building up there and just not fully getting sucked out. I did end up getting a new dust collector, so it's no worries there, but this last dust collector just really couldn't keep up with this machine, but is more than adequate now. So I'm going to take the frame, now that it's dry, over to the drum sander, and I'm going to go ahead and peel off all of that excess glue and get everything perfectly to the same level and thickness and get it nice and smooth. But you can see here that I kept tripping the breaker, and this was really frustrating because this machine only requires 15 amps and it was on a 15 amp breaker. So I was really confused about what was happening, but after this video I ended up replacing it with a 25 amp breaker and I've had zero issues with it now. I'm going to go ahead and use that same 1/4 inch router bit that I was using for the legs on the frame itself, and I think that leaves a nice touch. It kind of ties everything together really well and it kind of just makes it into a nice cohesive shape. Now to cut that same roundover on the center, I have to remove that dust arm, and then I have to spin it the actual opposite direction, because now that I'm cutting with the back teeth, if I spun the same direction, there'd be a lot of tear out. I'm going to go ahead and use this Veritas chisel block plane. There's no toe on this plane, so it allows me to get into those tight corners right there and leave a nice chamfer, which is not possible on most other block planes. And it's really difficult to use a chisel to do this, I've found. So I really like this block plane. It's a really not common that I use it, but when I do get to use it, I love using it. There was a ton of tear out on one side of each of the legs, so I'm just going to use my little block plane here and just smooth it all out, get rid of all of that tear out, and leave a really nice smooth edge. This process took quite a while to do, but it was a super important step on taking down some of my sanding time, because sanding through all of that tear out would have taken forever. So instead of using my router table to cut the chamfer on the feet here, I actually have to use either a block plane or a file or some sandpaper, because the edges of this aren't straight. They're at that angle, that nice taper. The bearing wouldn't have a flat surface area, so it wouldn't cut a consistent chamfer. I repeated this process for all 4 of the feet on each leg. Now I'm going to go ahead and drill the holes where I'm going to put a dowel to actually attach the legs to the frame itself. And just using this dowel will give it a lot stronger of a bond than just gluing it, because end grain to long grain in a glue joint doesn't hold up very well. You can see that I'm using that little square to make sure I'm drilling a 90-degree hole because I do not have a drill press right now. And I'm just using compressed air to blow all the wood chips out of there to make sure that my glue joint is nice and strong. I went ahead and pre-glued all of the dowels into the legs themselves. This makes it a little bit easier when it comes to glue up time, just there's nothing slipping around. So since I don't have a drill press, all the dowels aren't in the exact same location. So I'm going to line it up exactly where I want it and just use my wooden mallet to tap and leave an imprint of where that dowel is going to line up. As you can see right there, it's not perfectly in the center like it should be. So this is just a little trick to kind of fix my lack of tools. And now I'm going to drill out all of the holes into the actual frame itself where the dowel is going to slide in to hold the leg. And again, I'm just using compressed air to get everything out of that hole to make sure there's nothing in there when I do my glue up. And you can see it lines up nice and tight right there. The only issue with this is that now each leg will only fit into the hole that is cut for that leg. So I have to keep track of which leg goes where, which is pretty difficult to do. But I laid out some tape and cut around that tape and pulled that tape off. So now there is a piece of tape exactly where I want my glue. This is really, really important because I'm going to pre-finish everything so that when I do the glue up, I don't have to worry about the glue spilling out and making it so the stain won't stick to the actual wood itself, which is really obvious and looks really bad. So pre-finishing really helps with that problem of leaving the light spots in the stain. So I'm going to leave that tape on when I rub the stain on, and then when I peel that tape off, there'll be a perfect spot where the glue can stick to the wood and bond perfectly, and there won't be any glue spilling out and ruining the stain. I'm using Walrus Oil's furniture oil for this, and then I'm going to use a layer of their furniture wax on top of it to really pop that sheen out and make it look really pretty. I also made sure to be very careful to not get any stain on where that dowel is or where any glue is going to be. And here's that wax that I was talking about putting on. And you can see when I put it on how the dark spots really start to pop. Also, I didn't record it, but I did sand everything from 80 grit to 220, which took about 3 hours. I ended up being really happy with the figure on this wood. I wasn't sure how pretty this wood was going to be, but after putting the stain on it, it really stands out. It has some really good ambrosia and some nice figure, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Now that the stain is dried, I'm going to carefully rub glue on all the exposed wood and make sure I get it into the hole itself where the dowel is going to go. I'm going to put it also on the dowel itself and to the surrounding area of the leg that's going to be jointing the frame. And you can see what I was talking about earlier, that I have to keep track of which leg goes where or else it won't line up perfectly. Yeah, I kind of goofed on that a little bit. When I was sanding it, I sanded off the numbers that I had, and I just kind of had to figure it out on the spot, which was a little stressful, but I got it all figured out pretty quickly, and this glue up altogether went super smooth, and I was super excited about it. Now that I have everything actually glued together, I have to figure out how to clamp it, which was quite the challenge. But I came up with this way of using these foam pads so I don't mess up the stain, because I mean, one little scratch and I have to restain the entire surface. So I just used these clamps and these foam pads and clamped it down onto the workbench itself. And I just lightly clamped it, got everything square, wiped off the excess glue with a damp rag, and then I put a couple more clamps on and squeezed it down nice and tight. Once I had gotten everything tightened down nice and tight, I took that damp rag and again just wiped all of those glue joints. Because of the stain, the glue won't really stick that well, so just wiping it off left a nice smooth surface and didn't mess with the stain at all. So after all the materials and time I would have put into this, I would have charged around $1,000 for this. And remember, the person who I made this for is receiving it for completely free, no charge at all. And if you want to win your very own free table, I am giving away a $2,000 table at 2,000 subscribers. And all you have to do to enter is subscribe to my channel, and you have your chance to win a $2,000 coffee table. More about that in the next video, but for now, just subscribe for your chance to win. I'm super happy with this build. Here's some photos of the final product. The shape looks great, the splines look good, the color of the wood looks good. The glass is cracked, but I did replace it before I gave it to the lady, and she was super excited with it, but I didn't get any video of it, unfortunately. Again, I am giving away a $2,000 coffee table for one lucky subscriber, so go ahead and subscribe now. I will randomly choose a subscriber at 2,000 subscribers, and I will work with them to design the base for this awesome table that I already chose the slab of wood for.